Sandy Moss here again with another bit from my professor's closet. And what I'm going to show you here are things that we've talked about before, but there's a wrinkle here that I thought would be interesting. What I have here are, first of all, a harpoon. This is an Eskimo or Inuit harpoon. Actually, this comes from the Western Arctic, which we think of as being Eskimo, and the Eastern Arctic, Greenland, and the upper part of Canada are often called the Inuit peoples there. All related, but there are distinctions that are made because of the locations they come from. But anyway, this is a harpoon that fits into a shaft that's found on a long wooden shaft, and it's driven into the animal, which has a line going through this hole, and when the harpoon is in place and the animal starts swimming against it, it toggles, goes down like this, so it's less likely to pull out. So it's a toggle harpoon. We talked about this before. And this is another one of the same general type. It had a blade here. This one had a blade here. These were made for slate blades, ground slate blades, which kind of dates them to before the use of metal in the Arctic. And that use of metal really didn't become very common until the middle 1700s. So the fact that these were made for slate or flint blades means that these things are, most likely predating that 1700 time, and they could be even considerably older than that. But at any rate, the two are rather similar here, with some changes that are sort of interesting. One change is that one change is here, that the sharp barb is missing here. The barb has been fashioned into a little tail end that looks like a whale's tail. Okay, so it's been carved to look like the animal that it was pursuing, probably a beluga whale, not a big bowhead whale, but a smaller whale like the beluga whales. But the other thing that's happened here is that there's a cutout here in the sort of the middle of the bottom of the harpoon, and this cutout with two lashing holes on either side, this cutout is very, very similar to the cutout on this tool here. And I've talked about these before too. This is actually not a harpoon, this is a drum handle. This is meant to use an Inuit or Eskimo drum, which is a round wooden piece that's like a tambourine with the skin stretched over it without the jangly cymbals in it. So this holds a circular wooden hoop, and the person using this drum holds it with its hand like this, and the drum is like this, and then he beats the edge of the drum, the wooden edge of the drum, with a wooden wand to make the skin vibrate. And this is a musical instrument, just about the only musical instrument that we find among the Eskimos and Inuits. So this is a drum handle. This is a harpoon, but somebody decided after a while this harpoon had outlived its usefulness. The tip here is kind of a wide slot on it. It outlived its usefulness, and so waste not, want not, they made a drum handle out of it. So this is a harpoon head that's been repurposed to another function, which is that of a drum handle. Kind of interesting, but it gets even more interesting than that. So now we'll take a little break and look at this a bit closer, because it has some fairly interesting things to it. So here we're looking at the underside of this harpoon, once a harpoon and secondarily a drum handle. And we see that someone has written something on this. And now this is relatively recent. The native peoples in Alaska, and this comes from Western Alaska, the native peoples there were not, first of all, they didn't have a written language at all, and they only learned to write after the missionaries began teaching the Eskimo schools in the early 1800s. So the fact that someone had written on this means that it's dating it to probably the 1900s, I would guess. And this says, this, T-H-I-S here, and then long time ago. So the maker of this drum handle is saying, this thing is old. This was an older thing that was made a long time ago, and now I've changed it. And then on the other side, we find something that's much more subtle, but especially interesting, because there's fine engraving here, done with probably the tip of a stone tool, not a metal tool, that shows a group of men in a boat. Kind of a boat which is known as an umiak. It's not a kayak, it holds several people, and this one has 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 guys in here. And these umiaks were, 20 feet, 30 feet long, and they were made of walrus skin stretched over a wooden frame, but they were open with no decking. So we have this bunch of people in here, and the guy in the front is a harpooner, and he's throwing a harpoon. You can see the harpoon here if you look closely, and it's headed right to this whale, which is clearly a bowhead whale. It's has this big head with a big jaws on it. And so we have a whaling scene written on this, or inscribed on this harpoon. Really kind of nifty to see that kind of an image in an old harpoon. So I think this is just a fabulous piece of art, and interest in that it has been modified to go from a harpoon to a drum handle, and still retains a vestige of its early harpoon history, with a harpoon being thrown illustrated on it. A neat thing.